All right, my name is Isaac Reichman. I'm the Director of Public Information at the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. Thank you for joining this webinar. It is titled Phase 4 Guidelines for Food Service and Bars. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I'm going to do my best to answer questions as they come in today. If you have any questions, we should have about 150 total attendees, which is wonderful. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat function on your webinar. You'll notice there is a chat and there is also a Q&A. Please submit them via the chat. It's the easiest way to process the questions as they're coming through. Again, we expect over 150 total attendees at this webinar, so I'll do my best to answer the questions. I may not get to every question, however. So you'll see at the bottom of every slide, there is an email, BACP outreach at cityofchicago.org. If I don't get to any questions, please submit your questions via email to that email. Someone, either me or someone from my team, will follow up with answers. That's the case in case I don't get to questions, or perhaps some questions may require me to consult with some of my colleagues in order to get those answers. So please do submit those questions. Submit those questions via email. Also, this webinar will be recorded. It will be posted on the Business Workshops page, that page that you used in order to that page that you used in order to access this webinar. You'll be able to find a recording of this webinar there. I also did a very similar webinar on Monday, and that is already up at chicago.gov/businessworkshops. Let me put that into the chat so folks can see that website. And if you're looking for, printable, this information in a printable version, I'm really just going through the industry guidelines, which can be found at chicago.gov/reopening. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the presentation. Here's the agenda for today. So we're going to talk about Phase 4, the overview, the criteria, why we're here, why we're ready for Phase 4 as a city, and what it means for the whole city. Then we can talk about food service and bars in detail and answer all your questions you have about food service and bars as they're reopening. Also, reopening resources, what information you need in order to be successful, and then enforcement a little bit. Finally, it's here, it's bold. I've already typed it into the chat. Please visit chicago.gov/reopening if you have not done so already. And I'll make sure to, and all the, most of the answers to questions you have will be there. I do see a couple questions come through related to the guidelines. I will be covering those. If I don't cover them when I get to the guidelines, please feel free to resubmit to make sure I see those questions. So a little bit about Phase 4. As I said, we are ready for Phase 4, called Gradually Resume, this Friday, June 26th. Again, Friday, June 26th is when the city will be transitioning into Phase 4. A couple points about that. First of all, that is the same day that the rest of the state is transitioning into Phase 4, which is great. I know a couple weeks ago, the health commissioner thought that we wouldn't be able to transition until July 1st at the earliest, but the data has been really good over the last couple of weeks. We've seen really good results, and that means we're ready to go to Phase 4 on June 26th, which for restaurants and bars means indoor dining at limited capacity. Now, let me be clear. We are going to Phase 4 on the same day as the state, but our restrictions, our capacity guidelines, they're not the same as the state. And the reason for that, I think, is pretty simple. We've had a different outbreak here in Chicago than the rest of the state has. So we're still having hundreds of new cases every day in the city of Chicago. We're still having a higher incidence in the city of Chicago than in the rest of the state. And therefore, our guidelines are not the same as the rest of the state. They can't be. And if we did have the same guidelines as the rest of the state, we'd have a spike. And the goal of going to phase four is not to do what every other state and city, or lots of other states and cities have done as they reopen. The goal is not to see a spike. We're seeing spikes in lots of other places, and we need to have strict capacity restrictions in place in order to make sure we're preventing that spike. And these capacity restrictions that I'm going to talk about, they may not be in place for all of phase four. We hope they'll only be in place for frankly just a few weeks. But they do need to be in place, and they do need to be strictly followed. So the goal of this phase is to further reopen Chicago. You'll find almost all industries truly are reopening in phase four, with a couple exceptions. And again, with capacity restrictions in place. Public amenities can continue to reopen. I'm sure you saw that the lakefront opened up on Monday. But again, we're not out of the woods. I want to reiterate, and I will say it many, many times, we're not out of the woods. And face covering should still be worn. Social distancing should still be followed. Capacity restrictions, gathering size. You should continue to socially distance. You should continue to allow vulnerable residents to shelter. And critically, and most important, probably more important than anything else in this presentation, you should continue to stay home if you are sick. Chicago has an anti-retaliation ordinance. That means that if you are sick with COVID-19 symptoms, you are required to stay home, and your employer cannot punish you, cannot retaliate against you for doing so. You must stay home when you're sick, cannot be retaliated against for doing so, and that's critical. And also, if you're sick, if you have symptoms, you've been in contact with someone that has symptoms and is sick, please get tested. That's the only way we're going to really make it to the next stage. So what does phase four mean? So under phase four, again, most sectors are able to reopen. You'll really see that, really across the board, phase four allows for reopening with kind of capacity restrictions and gathering size and social distancing measures in place. So childcare, including summer programs, can start to reopen. City services, parks and libraries. Obviously, the lakefront opened up on Monday. Office-based jobs still at that 25% capacity. Hotels and lodgings and outdoor attractions are starting to reopen. Retail stores. Personal services can now do services that allow face coverings to be removed for short periods of time. Health and fitness clubs can now open for more than just one-on-one training and outdoor classes. Restaurants and bars, obviously, our focus for today. Indoor dining, indoor service with 25% capacity and a maximum of 50 total people. Places of worship. Museums and zoos are reopening. Performance venues and movie theaters. I just finished the training for performance venues and movie theaters. I know they're very excited to reopen under strict safety guidelines. So what do I mean by food service? Truly, I mean anything that serves food or gives away food for eating or drinking on site, or to go for that matter as well. But any restaurants and cafeterias, full service restaurants, limited service restaurants, food courts, buffets, any drinking establishment, breweries, lounges, bars, and taverns. Also includes catering, food trucks, food carts. Also event venues. Any space that has food service should be following the food service guidelines. Bagel shops, coffee shops, cafes, ice cream shops. Also, if you're another industry but have a portion of your establishment that has food service, that portion should be following these guidelines. For example, hotels that have restaurants or delivery, anything like that, or museums that have cafes. Anything that has anything related to food service or drinking should be following these guidelines, including, again, event venues, wedding venues, things like that. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail as well. So before I jump on the next slide into the detailed guidelines for food service and bars, I want to provide an overview of all of the industry guidelines that you will find on chicago.gov/reopen. They're really split up into 4 categories. Healthy interactions. This means social distancing, and your magic number for social distancing continues to be 6 feet. So 6 feet of social distancing. That means for restaurants, 6 feet between tables. It means for retail, having 6 feet placards set up. It means for health and fitness centers, 6 feet between machines. That 6 feet is what you'll see across the board. And that's because our health experts say the easiest way, the most likely way you get this virus is by being within 6 feet of somebody for an extended period of time. As long as you're, so by being 6 feet away, you can be safe. Gathering size, that 25% capacity, you will see across the board for all different industry with some minor exceptions. And also a total gathering size limit of 50 people. So that's what we have for indoor dining. That is also what you have for movie theaters. That's what you have for museums and gyms. It's not just, I just want to make it clear that's kind of the guidelines across the board. Then also face coverings worn at all times, with a couple exceptions that I'll talk about today, and obviously having hygiene requirements in place. Entry access, so safe spaces and conditions. What can you do to keep your place safe? And I'll talk about that in more detail. Then operational resilience and monitoring. How can you keep your employees and your customers safe into the future? So I'm going to talk in some detail about the guidelines. First, here's a little bit of an overview page with some visuals. What does it look like, food service and bars in phase 4? Contactless payment pickup should be available, and contactless payment is encouraged. I know many of you have set that up during the stay-at-home order. Strongly encouraged to keep doing that. Again, starting Friday, indoor dining and alcohol consumption is permitted at 25% capacity only. Again, I don't want anybody saying that you can, Isaac said I can be indoors starting today. No, this is starting this Friday, June 26th. Indoor dining, indoor drinking permitted at 25% capacity. Outdoor dining is still permitted following social distancing requirements. So there are no capacity limits for outdoor dining, provided that tables are 6 feet apart. Also, as you can see, number 2, everybody should be seated. This is across the board, any food, any drink, any even event venues, everybody should be seated while they are eating and drinking. This is a requirement across the board. Signage should be posted throughout your facility. For social distancing, proper hygiene, face coverings, etc. You can find that signage at chicago.gov/reopening. Employees are required to wear face coverings at all times. They can only be taken off by customers, by guests when they are seated. They're required at all other times. You must be maintaining 6 feet of distance, both employees and diners, and then the facility should be frequently disinfected. So again, I'm going to talk about these in more details, and I'm going to answer some of these questions. So first, this 6 feet distance. Again, tables, real quick flag on all of these slides. You'll notice the key changes from phase 3 are highlighted in red, just so you know what exactly is different in this phase. First, tables should be spaced 6 feet apart, and you should be decommissioning any table or setting up physical barriers if they cannot be moved. If you have 2 booths, for example, that are less than 6 feet apart, you should either be decommissioning them or setting up a physical barrier. You should be using an impermeable barrier any place where 6 feet of social distancing is not possible. And you should be marking with some sort of signage on the ground, or in some way, maybe something hanging, to mark any area where guests or employees queue, potentially when lining to come in, waiting for a table, lining up to pay, lining up to order. All that stuff is allowed, but they must be 6 feet apart, and they should be clearly marked. All right, I'm going to talk about this for a little bit. You should be limiting dining to no more than 10 people per table. So tables are 6 feet apart, no more than 10 people per table. That is a change compared to the last guidelines, remember. They used to be 6 feet per table. We're now increasing again to 10 people per table. Indoor dining is permitted limited to 50 individuals or 25% capacity for each room or space, whichever is fewer. Again, indoor dining is permitted, limited to 50 or 25% capacity for each room or space, whichever is fewer. Now, I do see a couple questions related to this, so I'll take a minute to answer a couple capacity questions if you guys have them. And I do see some other questions, and I'll answer those in a little bit. So does the 25% capacity include staff? No. For restaurants and bars, the 25% capacity does not include staff. And that's because staff are, coming in and out. They have different, they have their own facilities, their own, different kind of gathering areas. So your 25% capacity or your 50 individuals do not count towards that. Great question. Does a band count towards the maximum amount of people allowed? First of all, let me take a step back and say, first of all, bands are allowed. You can have some sort of entertainment, provided that everybody is 6 feet apart, and the band does not count in the head count towards that maximum amount of people. Can I give a question, an example of 50 occupants or 25% limit capacity? Yes, for example, let's say you have an establishment. Let's say that you have an establishment that has a typical capacity of 100 people. You should be taking the 25% capacity of that, which would now make your capacity 25 people. If you have a location that has a typical capacity of 400 people, you should take 25% of that, which is 100. However, remember, you are limited to 50. So it is 25% capacity, but no more than 50 individuals. And again, guests, performers do not count towards that. Regarding kind of some staff that are in the room constantly, our recommendation is that staff should not count towards the gathering size. Now, we can ultimately, it's up to the decision of the employer to determine what is the how to calculate whether to count employees. We're recommending you don't need to count employees towards that number, even if they are constantly in the room for this. If you have 3 large rooms in a venue, are you allowed 50 guests per room? Yes, you can have up to 50 guests per room, provided they are truly and fully different room spaces, not just different corners of the same room. Again, the max is 25% capacity. So if your 25% capacity does not go up to 50, you still must stay below 50. The question is capacity based on the occupancy placard? Yes, the capacity is based on the occupancy placard. A couple flags on that. However, if you do not have an occupancy placard, or if some folks have occupancy placards that are based on standing room. If that is the case, please send us an email to BACP Outreach, and we can help you. Our recommendations for how to calculate capacity if you do not have an occupancy placard. But I know that most restaurants and bars do have an occupancy placard, so you can take your occupancy and divide that by 4 to get 25% capacity. Again, with a maximum of 50 individuals. Again, I do see some questions coming in, and I will get to a couple of those questions in just a minute. I had a question, actually, here's a good one, regarding outdoor event versus outdoor dining. If an outdoor concert includes food or drinks, can they be unlimited capacity with social distancing? So all outdoor events are limited to a total capacity of 100 people. So again, I should have clarified here. There is, I didn't clarify that 100 people capacity here because most restaurants or bars would not reach 100 people outdoors with 6 feet of distance. But the outdoor capacity for any sort of gathering, any sort of event, including dining and drinking, would be limited to 100 people. Okay, I'm going to go on to a couple more guidelines, and then I'm going to answer additional questions as they come through. Ensure that protective gear are worn by all employees and customers. This is same for phase 3. Face coverings must be worn over nose and mouth. The exception is for people with medical conditions or disabilities. Also, face coverings can be removed while customers are seated and eating. That is the only time they can and should be removed. Employees should not be removing their face coverings. Hand sanitizer or hand washing facilities, they should be hand sanitizer, hand washing facilities should be readily available for customer and employee use. And you should be providing a training related to COVID-19. There's a couple available prior for your employees. You should be implementing screening measures for employees or customers. This means at minimum, employees should be self-screening to ensure that they don't have symptoms. And employees should not report to or be allowed to remain at work if they are exhibiting symptoms or reporting that they are feeling ill. You should post a pledge upon entrance or conduct a screening for your customers. So these are the minimum. At minimum, you should be doing a self-screen. Employees should be self-screening themselves. However, you can do more. You can have temperature checks, things like that. At minimum, you should be posting a pledge upon your entrance. And yes, children under 2 years of old are still exempt from that face covering requirement. You should be thoroughly cleaning, and a pledge upon entrance. So at minimum, you should be posting something upon entrance that says, folks that are entering this establishment pledge to be to not have COVID-19 symptoms. Again, that's absolutely the minimum. And you can do more. You should be thoroughly cleaning and sanitizing the entire facility prior to opening and throughout the day. You should be providing disposable table items where possible, and you should be cleaning and sanitizing non-disposable table items after each use. Again, as much as possible, you should be providing disposable table items. So again, our recommendation is to use disposable table items, but it's not a requirement. Regarding tablecloths, we don't have a specific recommendation on how often tablecloths should be changed. We do just recommend that you take, cleaning, you take seriously the cleaning of those items, and that you are, as much as possible, providing disposable table items. And yes, employees should be wearing face coverings at all times. You should be maintaining visual guidance on hygiene standards for employees, customers throughout restaurants, throughout bars. And you also should have a nonverbal agreement that customers or third-party delivery drivers posted before they enter the establishment. And you can find that information at the on chicago.gov/reopening. All right, I know I got a couple questions on this, so I'll talk about this for a little bit. All patrons must be seated. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. Even if it's outdoors, no standing room only. Even if it's at a bar, no standing room only. Even if it's at a private event, no standing room only. All patrons must be seated. Also, counter or bar seating is allowed, provided that 6 feet of distancing can be maintained. Again, bar seating is allowed. So just like if you imagine, when you have a table and the tables need to be 6 feet from each other, so each party is 6 feet from other parties, it's the same with a bar. Let's say you have a couple come to the bar, they're together, they can sit next to each other at the bar, but they must be at least 6 feet away from the next, from other individuals. And if you can't maintain that, then bar seating shouldn't be open. And again, no standing at bars. Also in red here, so this is new, cafeterias, buffets, any other kind of self-serve food station can reopen. They used to be closed under phase 3, but they can reopen. But provided that the employee is serving the food and wearing proper PPE. So customers cannot go up to a buffet themselves, but they can be they can be reopened with somebody serving from the buffet. If practical, you should consider workplace modifications to promote social distancing, maybe rearranging workstations, having staggering workstations, floor markings, things like that. Great. I'm going to take a minute to answer a couple of questions that came through here. To clarify, during a cocktail hour at a wedding or event, all guests need to be seated. Yes. Even this is the case again, even at private events, all guests need to be seated. There again, no kind of exemptions for at this point for this. So again, if you have an outside area that is standing, that cannot be open. You need to have some sort of seating for it to be open. I had a question here, do I eat? And that is the case even outside. All patrons must be seated. Do I need to install plexiglass between bartenders and guests? Now, we are recommending if 6 feet of social distancing can't be maintained, that you do install some sort of impermeable barrier. It's not a requirement, but it is something that we are strongly recommending. But bartenders, you know, we would recommend that they, just like servers, keep 6 feet away from folks at all times. Obviously, when they are dropping off a drink, something like that, they might have to get closer, but then if they can maintain 6 feet of distance all other times, that should be ideal. I had a question about why folks need to be seated. The reason for this is, you know, the goal at this point is to minimize congregating and to minimize close interactions. And when folks are standing, it is nearly impossible to make sure that folks are fully maintaining 6 feet of social distancing. It's, you know, when we have folks seated, you can make sure the tables are 6 feet apart. You can make sure that 6 feet of social distancing is happening. When folks are standing, you cannot make sure of that. So at this point, this is something we're looking at every single day, but at this point, seating only. And I'm going to talk a little bit about when events might change, and I'll give you some more information there soon. Can I pass beverages? Do beverages need to be covered? You can serve drinks. You can serve, drinks indoors or outdoors. They don't need to be covered. Let me scroll through and see a couple more questions. Do you recommend servers wear gloves? Now, additional PPE, is the face coverings are the requirements. Gloves, actually, and I recommend you visit chicago.gov/coronavirus. Unless gloves are kind of changed frequently, sometimes gloves could potentially transmit depending on how many things you're touching, it's possible to actually transmit more germs when you have gloves on. So we're not necessarily recommending gloves. It really truly depends on what you are doing. If you want to send me an email, I can get you connected with, to some folks from the health department that can provide more specific guidance related to PPE and what should and shouldn't be used. But face coverings are the requirement. Great question. Is it mandatory to take customer temperatures when entering the restaurant? No, that is not mandatory. What is mandatory is that you at least post a pledge upon the entrance, something that says, by entering this establishment, I am attesting that I do not have COVID-19 symptoms. You can do more. We encourage more, but it is not mandatory. Do you need to use disposable flatware? It is not a requirement, but where possible, we are recommending disposable table items. Can you elaborate on how to use social distance on the kitchen side? Now, I'm happy to answer via email kind of specific questions on your kitchen, but it should be, however possible, you should be keeping 6 feet away between employees. And again, the reason for this is the health department says, our health experts say, the main way that the disease is transmitted is being within 6 feet of somebody for 10 minutes or more. So if you have 2 kitchen staff that are within 6 feet of each other for extended periods of time, that can be, potentially dangerous. So as much as possible, it should be 6 feet of social distancing. And again, kitchen workers should all be wearing masks, wearing face coverings. We understand that can be a challenge, but that is absolutely a requirement. When you wear a face covering, you are keeping the people that you interact with safe. Great question about face shields. Face shields can be used but face shields do not replace face coverings. You can wear a face shield over your face covering, but they do not replace face covering. Something that is 2 or 3 inches in front of your face does not stop droplets from coming out of your mouth. You need to have something. That actually is closely tight over your nose and mouth. Does the city have a PDF of a pledge? We do actually. If you go, it's not cities, but I believe the Illinois Restaurant Association has put together language on a pledge, and that has been approved by the city. If you go to chicago.gov/reopening, if you go to the guidelines, you go to the food service and bars guidelines, you can find a link to that pledge. Should we be using disposable glassware only? Again, our recommendation is to use disposable everything, but if you're not using disposable, it should be thoroughly cleaned every time. I do have a couple more slides I want to get to in just about 10 minutes left. I will be answering additional questions, I promise, but let me get to these next couple slides. You should be limiting in-person work where possible. Obviously, your servers, your bartending staff need to be there, but you should consider online training or virtual staff meetings as much as possible. Limiting interaction between people. This means, and this is an important rule, for bars and taverns that do not have a retail food establishment, breweries, for example, that do not sell and serve food, you should be limiting seating to a maximum of 2 hours. Again, seating is limited, to a maximum of 2 hours if food is not served. You should still, and the reason for that, bars opened a little bit later than restaurants. The reason for that is we know when it's just drinking and no eating involved, that it's harder to maintain social distancing, I will say. If practical, encourage cashless and contactless ordering and payment. Again, curbside takeout, carryout, and delivery, just because you're reopening, shouldn't stop. Encourage reservations as much as possible to minimize waiting. Also, reservations will allow you to disinfect restaurant areas between them. Okay. Encourage patrons to remain outdoors or in their vehicles while waiting. The rules about drinking establishments, 2 hours, those apply to any place where food is not involved. So if you have a special event, for example, like a wedding where food is being served and food is involved, then those rules would not apply. Should be limiting travel for business. What does this mean? If you have multiple restaurant locations, staff should really be sticking to one of them. And then this last part is critical. As we hope to transition into additional phases, we need to make sure we have a good grasp on this virus. What does that mean? You should be prepared for an employee contracting COVID-19. It should not be a surprise. You should be following CDC guidelines for returning to work. And if somebody has had close contact with coworkers or any other person who's diagnosed with COVID-19, they should be self-quarantined. And if you become aware of 2 or more cases possibly associated with an establishment, you must report that to the health department. So I'm going to do a couple additional points around alcohol sales. If you're selling alcohol for on-site consumption, if you're a bar, a tavern, a brewery, a restaurant, anything, you must stop selling alcohol for on-site consumption at 11 p.m. each night. Alcohol sales must end at 11 p.m. each night. Other license activity may continue until the hours determined by your license or permit. If you have a 24-hour restaurant, for example, you can continue selling food, but you must stop selling alcohol at 11. Outdoor patios have their specific hours, sidewalk cafes have their specific hours, and you do need to follow those. Alcohol sales to go. I had a question here. Can you sell unopened bottles of liquor or champagne to go? Yes. If you can sell liquor to go, that must end at 9 p.m. every day. So all alcohol sales to go must end at 9 p.m. every day. You also, as of last Wednesday, can sell cocktails to go as well. Not just, they need to be, pre-mixed cocktails sold in a sealed and tamper-evident container, but you can mix them and you can sell them to go. Again, that must end at 9 p.m. every day. Lastly, I want to quickly review some of the outdoor options because even as we are opening indoor dining, we want to make it clear, all of the health data, all of the science says that outdoor is still significantly safer. So we want to make sure if people have outdoor options that they're continue to use those outdoor options, especially as it continues to be nice out. So that means rooms with retractable roofs or indoor spaces near walls that are at least 50% open. You don't need and I also want to emphasize that, make sure you have the proper permit or license for your outdoor options. So if you have a room with a retractable roof or indoor spaces near a wall, you don't need an additional permit or license. Outdoor patios or rooftop, you do need to have an outdoor patio license. If you're serving alcohol, if you're not serving alcohol, it just needs to be included in your retail food establishment license. Sidewalk cafe permit from BACP is required to operate a sidewalk cafe. It's only for retail food establishments only. An expanded outdoor dining permit is required if you want to expand into the street or private property. Finally, I want to put this slide up for a minute, and I'm going to pause here to answer questions. So the reason why we're ready to phase 4, ready to transition to phase 4 again this Friday, is that we're finally at under 200 cases every day in Chicago. That's a big milestone, and I want to thank all businesses that have truly helped us get here by following the guidelines and restrictions that we've had in place. But we're still having over 150 each. We still have over 150 cases each day. So what that means is while we're still in this moderate to high incidence rate of 100 to 199 cases, indoor capacity will be limited to 25%, and indoor gathering size will be limited to 50 people. But if our case rate goes down to under 100, we could potentially transition to 50% and 100 people, and so on and so forth. Our goal is to ultimately get down to under 20 cases. But again, goal is to get down to under 20 cases, but we're still not close to that yet. We've made a lot of progress, but we're not close to that yet. So I know I saw some questions come in about what might happen next. This provides a little bit of an overview of what might change if our case rates continue to go down. Now, within each of these changes, we also might have changes about seating and face coverings and things like that. Those are all still to be determined. Also, I want to make a note on the bottom. The exact capacity and gathering size restrictions are subject to change from the health department. These are guidelines that we're kind of using at this point, but they are subject to change. Great. Couple questions. I'm going to take a minute now to answer questions. Let's see. Question: How should we dispose single-use face masks, etc., regular trash? I believe just do the regular trash is fine for there. I had a question about the closing times still in effect. Yes, those are still in effect. Are there guidelines for what constitutes a face covering? Many people, are just pulling their shirts over their mouth. The guidelines are that it needs to be something that is fully fully covering your face and your mouth. I believe the health department has specific guidelines on the use of face coverings and what exactly constitutes a face covering. You can visit chicago.gov/coronavirus. Okay. When reporting COVID-19 cases, to report only diagnosed cases or symptomatic ones as well. So let me take a step back. Everybody who's having any sort of symptoms should be getting tested. So hopefully if someone's having a symptomatic case, they're getting tested, and you should be encouraging your employees to get tested. Testing is widely available at this point. However, the requirement is that you report any cases possibly associated with your establishment. So you should be reporting them even if they are just possible cases. I had a question. Someone was looking specifically for the language for that pledge. Feel free to send me an email and I will follow up with that language. But again, if you go to chicago.gov/reopening and you click on the industry guidelines for food service and bars, you should be able to access the pledge there. I had a question about this slide here. Is this the case rate of a particular time period, such as a 7-day average? Again, I will not be able to, I am not the health department, so I don't want to speak too much about the health guidance because I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not, I'm not the expert here, but my understanding is that it is the 7-day rolling average. Can we allow walk-in or reservation only? We encourage reservations. You can allow walk-in, but we are encouraging reservations. Now, will this be enforced? That's a great question. Yes, this is enforced. Our department is enforcing this. Now, we're focusing on education. We're certainly focusing on education, but we will be enforcing these requirements, and there can be fines for this. Now, there isn't any, at this point, it's not publicly available, but we will be again enforcing this. The signage that you can download and post, again, can be found at chicago.gov/opening. We have resources available there. I'm seeing a couple questions come in specifically about the 11 p.m. curfew. I'm going to need to circle back with our liquor licensing team here, so you can send those questions to us via email at bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. And the fines for violating this, just like violating the stay-at-home order, can range up to $10,000. Now, that's not the typical fine, but they can range that high. Questions about back of the house size limit. So any gathering should be limited to no more than 50 people. So even back of the house should be limited to no more than 50 people, even if you're providing PPE, spacing, etc. Okay. Again, I'm seeing a couple questions come in about that pledge. Please email me. I don't have it directly available. Please email me, and I will follow up with that pledge. Great. Got a good question about these are recommended guidelines, then there's no enforcement. So you'll see we can enforce these guidelines. Now there are parts of the guidelines that say, this part is recommended, this part is optional. That stuff is just recommended, but we do have enforcement power for these guidelines. If a cafeteria has individually packaged food items, can that be self-service? Yes, if they are fully prepackaged food items, then they can be self-service. The enforcement, it's done by BACP, our department, and the Chicago Department of Public Health. Can you decline service to guests if they are not in compliance with wearing masks? Yes, you can decline service to guests if they are not in compliance there. To clarify, at a cocktail hour at a wedding or event, all guests need to be seated. Yes, to clarify again, all guests need to be seated. Anytime they are eating or drinking, they need to be seated, period. End of conversation on that one. That is not an option. That is something that is really required across the board. And the reason for that is that, again, when folks are standing and mingling, you can't maintain that 6 feet of social distance. Now, this is something that we may look at changing if the incidence rate goes down, but that is the requirement for now. Again, regarding seating, I know we're getting a lot of questions about this. If you offer seating and guests choose to stand, guests need to be seated. If you cannot ensure that guests are seating, then you should not be open for that capacity. Now, if guests are waiting to be seated, and they can stand while they're waiting to be seated, just make sure that they are 6 feet apart. And we recommend that folks, if they're coming to a restaurant, for example, that they make reservations so there isn't waiting time, or that they wait in their car or they wait outside as much as possible. Just scrolling through a couple of these questions, make sure I didn't miss too much. Again, any questions about that 11 p.m. hour? Please do send those via email. Our current incident rate, I think the most recent number I saw for 7-day rolling average was 153. I believe it was 150, 160 was in that range. Um, so again, you can have food serving with a splash guard allowed. That can be open. You can do you can have buffet style serving provided that it's served by the employees. Scrolling through some of the older questions. If you have a large scale venue that has 3 rooms, again, you can allow up to 50 guests per room, provided that each room is under 25% capacity. So it is past 11:45, so I do want to be cognizant of people's times. If you have any additional questions, please send us via email, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. This webinar has been recorded. All of these webinars have been recorded. I think this is the 8th one we've done this week. Again, if you have questions about the liquor stuff, please send those via email. I'll get them and I'll get in touch with our liquor team to get those answers. All the webinars have been recorded. They will be posted by the end of the day tomorrow at our business workshops page. We will be updating the FAQ. If you have any questions, again, the email is on the bottom of every page, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Also, I just want to reiterate in closing, thank you all so much. I know it's been an incredibly challenging last few months, but we have not seen the spike that a lot of other cities and states have seen, and that's because of effort from folks like you guys. We want to reiterate that we're doing a lot better than we have been, but we're by no means out of the woods. So it is very critical that we're not really pushing the limits here, that we're following the guidelines, and that we're doing this safely. It's really, really critically important. And again, as you can see on this page, we would love to get up to 50% capacity. The health commissioner has said it could happen in the next few weeks, but it's all about the data. It's all about bringing that case rate down. And the only way we're going to do that is continuing to follow these safety precautions. So thank you all very much.